Peace be upon you, and welcome to a new episode. Today I'm going to tell you a true story from Tunisia, but not just any story. This is a case that made an entire city live in deep fear for many long months. Imagine with me. In the late 1980s, children were disappearing one after another with no clear trace, as if the earth had swallowed them whole. The first one was on the 15th of June 1987. He used to help with collecting almonds, and suddenly, he vanished without a single sign. People searched everywhere. The police searched too. But his body was only discovered months later, buried in a distant farm. Then, on 26th January 1988, another boy disappeared. But this time, it was clearly a personal act of revenge. His body was later found showing signs of severe violence. The families became extremely terrified. Schools shut down. Parents refused to let their children go outside. And as time went on, the victims increased. How did they discover the bodies? That's what will keep you awake at night, because what was happening wasn't random coincidence. These were carefully planned crimes. Every victim was chosen based on a specific pattern, and the acts were carried out in a way that left the police confused for many long months. Before we start our story, don't forget to like and share the episode so it reaches as many people as possible. And wait for me every Saturday, Monday, and Wednesday for a new episode. And without getting into too many details, let's dive deep into our story. This story begins in 1944, in the city of Tunis, during the French occupation of Tunisia. A woman named Houria was living a very difficult life, and she was accused of committing adultery, so she was imprisoned while she was pregnant. In the hospital, she gave birth to her son inside the prison, and they named him Naceur Damergi. This was the beginning of Naceur's life. Born in a place like that, with no known father, the child of an illegitimate relationship with a man from the Zagouan region. Houria spent nearly 2 years in prison with her son until she was released. After that, she married a kind farmer, and this man registered Naceur under his own name in the official records to give him a legitimate father's name. But that didn't change the truth, because everyone in Nabeul, the city they moved to, already knew the full story about Houria's past and how Naceur came into the world. Naceur grew up facing social rejection. From a young age, he noticed that people didn't like him. Other kids wouldn't play with him, and they constantly accused him of being a child of sin. His mother, Houria, used to tell him that his father had died long ago, and she didn't want to tell him the full truth because he was still too young to understand. He grew up feeling a deep sense of inferiority, and by the time he reached around 22 years old, he still didn't know the truth about his father or his mother's past. Despite all this hardship, Naceur tried to build a normal life. He worked in agriculture, collecting almonds and fruit, and selling honey. He was very smart and spoke fluent French from his schooling. His intelligence helped him learn many things, but it didn't help him overcome the deep loneliness inside him. In 1964, when Naceur was 20 years old, he decided to completely change the course of his life. He fell in love with his cousin Radia, and he went to his mother to tell her he wanted to marry her. Houria hesitated at first because she knew Radia's family wouldn't easily agree due to her past, but eventually, they went to ask for her hand together. Radia's family was in a very difficult position. They didn't want to marry their daughter to Naceur because of his family background, but they told him they agreed in principle, yet he wasn't financially ready. They told him to travel to France, work there for a year or two to save money, and then return to marry Radia. Naceur was overjoyed. He thought this was his chance for a new beginning. So he traveled in 1964 and worked there in agriculture and beekeeping, just like he used to do in Tunisia. Every month, he sent letters to Radia, telling her about his daily life and saying he was saving money to return so they could build a home together. But what he didn't know was that Radia's family had married her off just a few months after he left, and his aunt had been collecting his letters without letting Radia read them or even know about them. Naceur spent 4 whole years in France, suffering from loneliness and daily exhaustion, working day and night with one goal: to return and marry Radia and start a new life far from the rejection he had known all his life. Those years were full of patience, but they built a huge hope inside him, a hope that was completely shattered when he returned. In 1968, Naceur returned to Nabeul, full of hope and money he had earned, but the shock was enormous and heartbreaking. He found that Radia had married another man and had a son. His aunt told him that people had said he would lose his morals in France and never return, so they quickly married her off to protect her reputation. It was a lie, but Naceur believed it. It broke his heart completely and made him feel deeply betrayed. He went to his aunt's house, caused a huge scene, screaming and demanding to know why they deceived him, saying he had lived 4 years holding on to the hope of marrying Radia. But they told him to forget her. She was now married and had a family, and he should look for another girl. He couldn't accept what had happened. He went to his mother, Houria, asking why people hated him so much, and what sin he had committed to deserve all this. And here, Houria finally told him the entire truth: that he was the child of an illegitimate relationship, that his real father was from Zagouan, and that his father had denied him, and she had given birth to him in prison. This was the second major shock. It made Naceur feel like the whole world was built on lies and betrayal. This began to plant inside him a sense of revenge against the society that had rejected him from the day he was born. He decided to escape the village. He rented a small farm on the outskirts of Nabeul and began working in beekeeping and almond farming. He lived alone, introverted, quiet, always thinking about his past and how society had rejected him since childhood. Over time, his personality began to change gradually, and he began to experience strange episodes, like sudden waves of heat in his body, which he later confessed would push him toward bizarre actions. The years passed, and Naceur was still single, unable to forget Radia or the betrayal he felt. Every time he tried to get close to a girl, she rejected him after hearing about his family background. In 1971, Naceur was imprisoned for a long period for a crime of harassment and attempted murder of Fatma, the sister of a woman he had been involved with. The imprisonment lasted 13 years, until 1984. During those years, his personality grew harsher, and he learned things about crime and planning. He was released with an even stronger sense of isolation and anger. After his release, he met an orphan girl named Halima, who was 17 and working in a household. He liked her. Naceur tried to marry her, but in order to prove himself in front of her employer, who had a conflict with a man who worked as a bank manager, he committed his first major crime. He kidnapped the manager's son, killed him, buried him in a distant area, and presented this as a bride price to marry Halima. He did indeed marry her in 1984, but the marriage didn't last long. Halima couldn't tolerate his harsh and strange personality. She escaped after 3 months and filed for divorce. Naceur became extremely angry. He searched for her to take revenge, but couldn't find her. So he decided to take revenge on her sister, Gaia. He kidnapped her, committed another crime, killed her, and buried her in another farm. This marked the beginning of a series of crimes, all in Nabeul, driven by his resentment toward the people there who had rejected him since childhood. This pushed him to start planning bigger, more organized crimes, as if he were responding to every rejection he had ever lived through. On the 15th of June 1987, the crimes officially began after years of isolation and thoughts that built up inside him. Naceur planned every crime with extreme precision, watching his victims for days before acting. He chose victims mostly aged 10 to 18, those who worked in markets or farms, because they were easier to lure and less capable of resisting physically. The first victim was Muhammad Ali, 10 years old. Naceur observed him for days as he moved around the area. He offered him money to help collect almonds at the farm. He took him on his well-known red motorcycle, familiar in the area but not suspicious. At the farm, he asked him to engage in an intimate act. When Muhammad refused, he covered his mouth and pressed on his neck until he died. Then he buried him in a hole on the farm and covered it with soil and stones to hide any trace. Naceur kept a small notebook where he wrote the names of the victims, the dates, and the exact burial location so he wouldn't mix things up and could remember everything if needed. This helped him continue the crimes without losing control over the details, as if he were building a personal record of his revenge. After the first crime, Naceur waited months so he wouldn't raise suspicion immediately, but he continued the same pattern with slight improvements in his planning. On 26th January 1988, he kidnapped Ramzi, the son of Radia, his former fiancée. This was direct personal revenge. Naceur had watched Ramzi for many days before acting. He confirmed he was her son by monitoring the family. He offered him small work, helping sell fruit or do simple tasks, then took him to the farm. He tortured him more than he did the others, using a sharp tool, trying to satisfy the anger he felt from the betrayal. The execution was more calculated. He changed the farm slightly each time so no clear pattern would emerge, and he used his red motorcycle to appear as normal as any other farmer in the area. He also chose side roads to avoid being seen. After the crime, he buried Ramzi in a deep hole and wrote in his notebook, "Ramzi, revenge on Radia." This made him feel that this crime had a clearly personal purpose. The crimes continued throughout 1988. Naceur chose victims from among the children who sold fruit or helped in farms because they were often alone or far from their families. This became part of the planning strategy that he refined over time to make his crimes more efficient. In early 1988, he kidnapped a boy named Hedi, who was 12 years old. He had watched him playing near the market for days. He offered him money in exchange for helping with some work, took him to the farm, committed the crime, killed him, and buried him in a hole under a tree, carefully covering it so no one would easily discover it. As the crimes increased, Naceur developed a more precise pattern. He would watch the victim for at least a full week, learn their daily schedule in detail, choose a non-busy day, lure them with a promise of work or money, take them on the motorcycle to the farm, do what he wanted, and after killing them, bury the body in a carefully chosen spot. This made him feel complete control over the process. In one of the crimes, in mid-1988, he kidnapped a boy named Ali, 14 years old. He offered him help in selling figs, took him to a secluded place, committed the crime, killed him, and buried him under the bed in his hut so he could return and look at the body if he wanted. This was part of a strange psychological pattern he developed over time, as if he were keeping a souvenir of his revenge. Naceur kept changing the location slightly each time, sometimes in the main farm, sometimes in a neighboring one, to spread the burial spots and avoid leaving evidence concentrated in a single place. This was a carefully designed strategy to make it difficult for the police to connect the crimes quickly. He also varied the timing a bit so there would be no clear time pattern. The notebook was like a personal record, helping him feel that his crimes had a purpose and weren't random. He kept it hidden in the hut so no one would find it. By late 1988, he kidnapped Hind and Henin, the sisters who were 14 and 10 years old. He had watched them selling prickly pears in the market for days. He offered to buy a large quantity and help transport it, took them to the farm, and when Henin screamed, he killed her first by pressing on her neck. Then he committed the crime with Hind, killed her, and buried both of them under the bed in the hut. The planning here was more complex because there were two victims at once, so he changed the route to avoid being seen and chose sunset so the darkness would help him hide. This was the last crime in the series before he was arrested, and he had been planning more if he hadn't been caught. The crimes reached 14 victims, most of them boys and 3 girls, all in or around Nabeul, because Naceur's hatred was focused specifically on that city, the place that had rejected him from the day he was born. In one of the crimes, he regretted burying a victim in an area belonging to Sousse, not Nabeul, and later said in his confession that he felt sad because the victim was outside the region where he felt he had been wronged. This shows that his crimes were driven by revenge. He maintained secrecy by changing his methods, sometimes strangling, sometimes using a sharp tool, so there wouldn't be a clear pattern for the police. He washed his motorcycle after every crime so no traces would remain. This helped him continue for a long time without being caught, as if he were building a complete system for his revenge. Fear spread through Nabeul. People called him the Butcher of Nabeul. Schools closed, and the police imposed a curfew, but Naceur continued to plan and execute his crimes because he lived alone and no one initially suspected him. Now, let's talk about the investigation in detail. At the beginning, after the disappearance of Muhammad Ali on the 15th of June 1987, the police treated it like a normal missing person case. They searched the area, questioned the people who last saw him, but there were no strong clues because Naceur had buried the body well and left no clear trace, which made the investigation start slowly. As the disappearances increased, the police began to connect them. They realized there was a common pattern, so the Minister of Interior ordered a wide investigation. They summoned everyone with a record of harassment or child abduction in Nabeul and formed a special investigation team. This team started collecting information from all the victims' families, mapping the disappearance locations, and analyzing the pattern. During these months, the police created sketch images of the suspect based on reports from people who saw a man approaching children, and they published the description in newspapers and national TV, making people more cautious. Naceur was one of the early suspects because of his criminal history. He was arrested in early 1988, interrogated for long hours, questioned about his movements on the days of the disappearances, and his farm was inspected. But he was released because there was no strong evidence, no bodies were found, and no direct witnesses linking him to the crimes. This caused the investigation to continue without major progress, allowing Naceur to continue his crimes. As the crimes continued, by late 1988, the investigation became deeper and wider. The police created a detailed map of the disappearance sites and learned that most were near farms, so they began searching the farms one by one. They received many reports from frightened families, including people who said a man on a red motorcycle was approaching children in the market. The team began linking this description to Naceur. One officer, who was from Nabeul and personally knew Naceur, saw the sketch images and said they looked like him. So he and an assistant searched for him in the farms at night for days. One night, in November 1989, they found him at his farm, surprised him, restrained him, and arrested him again on 27th of November 1989. At first, Naceur denied everything, saying he was just a normal farmer and had no connection to the disappearances. But under pressure during interrogation, and with the evidence they collected, like testimonies about his red motorcycle and the proximity of his farm to the disappearance sites, he confessed to all the crimes. He led the police to the locations of the bodies and told them about the notebook where he wrote the victims' names and details. The police went to dig in those locations and found 13 bodies, and the 14th wasn't written in the notebook, but they found it after additional searching with the help of forensic experts. The investigation continued for months. The police questioned the victims' families, forensic doctors to examine the bodies and determine the causes of death, and psychologists to understand the motives. They learned that the motives were revenge against the society that rejected him, and that he suffered from psychological issues, including epileptic episodes that he claimed pushed him toward these acts. His confessions were broadcast on national television to calm public outrage, which helped bring closure to the case and reduce the fear in Nabeul. The trial began in 1990, and people followed the details day by day. Lawyers in Tunisia refused to defend Naceur because of the nature of the crimes, so the court assigned an official defense attorney. Naceur admitted to all 14 crimes during the court sessions, said he wasn't remorseful, and stated that this was revenge for the rejection and betrayal he experienced. The judge sentenced him to death by hanging under Tunisia's capital punishment laws. Naceur requested clemency from President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, but the request was denied after reviewing the case. On the 17th of November 1990, the execution was carried out in Naceur prison in Tunis, and it was the last execution in Tunisia, as later sentences were converted to life imprisonment. This story made people in Tunisia and beyond reflect on mental health, social rejection, and what happens to marginalized individuals from childhood. It showed how a difficult childhood can turn a person into something entirely different. It's an important lesson for all of us about the importance of supporting and protecting children and young people, so stories like this don't repeat in our societies. And with that, today's episode comes to an end. If this is your first time here, don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notifications so you don't miss anything new. See you in the next episode. Goodbye.